remember the exact moment I stopped believing in closure. It was January the 15th, 2023, when Detective Sarah Martinez called me at 3:47 a.m. My sister Emma had been missing for 17 years. 17 years of birthdays celebrated in silence, Christmas dinners with an empty chair, and a wound in my chest that never quite healed. And now, after nearly 2 decades, Sarah's voice crackled through my phone with 3 words I'd given up hoping to hear. We found her. But here's what nobody tells you about cold cases finally breaking open. The answers don't always bring peace. Sometimes they bring something far more complicated, far more devastating, and occasionally far more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. My name is Rebecca Thornton, and I've spent the last year documenting the most remarkable cold case resolutions of our time. Cases that seemed impossible. Murders unsolved for decades. Disappearances that baffled entire nations, and the technological miracles, human persistence, and pure chance that finally cracked them wide open. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about justice, time, and the human capacity for both evil and redemption. These aren't just stories about crimes solved. They're about families destroyed and rebuilt, about guilt that transcends generations, about secrets buried so deep they poisoned entire communities, and about the moment when truth finally, mercilessly, beautifully surfaces. Emma disappeared when she was 19 and I was 16. She walked out of our house in Portland, Oregon on a Tuesday morning to buy milk and never came back. The police searched for months. They dragged rivers, searched forests, interviewed hundreds of people. My parents spent their retirement fund on private investigators. My mother developed an anxiety disorder so severe she couldn't leave the house. My father started drinking and never stopped. And me? I became obsessed with the unsolvable. I studied forensic science, criminal psychology, investigative journalism, anything that might help me understand how someone could just vanish into thin air. That obsession led me here, to these stories, to this moment where I'm asking you to join me on a journey through the darkest corners of human nature and the brightest spots of human determination. If you've ever wondered what happens to the families left behind, if you've ever driven past a missing person poster and felt that chill of recognition, again, that it could be anyone at all, then you need to hear these stories. And when you do, I need you to share them. Because somewhere, someone is waiting for answers just like I was. Someone needs to know that cold cases can break open, that truth can surface, that justice, however delayed, can still arrive. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear will change how you see the world around you. The person sitting next to you on the bus, the neighbor who's lived on your street for 20 years, the friend who never quite talks about their past, they all have stories. And some of those stories are darker than you could possibly imagine. The first case I investigated after Emma was found started with a photograph that shouldn't have existed. In March 2023, a woman named Patricia Holloway was sorting through her deceased mother's belongings in Cleveland, Ohio, when she found a Polaroid tucked inside a 1987 cookbook. The image showed a teenage girl bound and gagged, terror frozen in her eyes. Written on the back in faded blue ink, Melissa, 1986. Patricia's hands shook as she held it. She'd never seen this girl before in her life. Her mother, Dorothy, had been a church secretary, a volunteer at the local food bank, a woman who baked cookies for every neighborhood gathering. The idea that Dorothy had possessed this photograph, had hidden it in her kitchen for over 3 decades, seemed impossible. But Patricia did what her conscience demanded. She took it to the police. Detective James Warren had been with Cleveland PD for 28 years. He'd seen things that would make most people lose faith in humanity entirely. But when Patricia placed that Polaroid on his desk, something in his gut told him this was different. This was important. He ran the image through their database. Nothing. He checked missing persons reports from 1986. Dozens of Melissas, but none matching the girl in the photo. He was about to file it away, another mystery without answers, when a rookie officer named Danny Chen suggested something radical. What if we use facial recognition but run it against current databases? If she survived, she'd be in her 50s now. Warren looked at the kid, like he'd suggested they consult a psychic. But it was 2023, and technology had advanced in ways that would have seemed like science fiction just a decade earlier. They had software that could age-progress faces, that could compare bone structure across decades of aging. So they tried it. 3 days later, the computer found a match. Melissa Ann Rodriguez, age 54, living in Tampa, Florida. She worked as an accountant, had 2 grown children, and according to every database they could access, had lived a completely normal life. Warren called her on a Tuesday afternoon. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Detective James Warren with Cleveland Police Department. I need to ask you about something that happened in 1986. The line went silent for so long, Warren thought she'd hung up. Then a voice barely above a whisper. I've been waiting for this call for 37 years. What Melissa told them next would unravel a crime so elaborate, so carefully hidden, that it had operated in plain sight for 4 decades. And it all centered on the woman Patricia had known as her loving mother, the sweet church secretary named Dorothy Holloway. Melissa had been walking home from school in Cleveland when a woman approached her, claiming to be a friend of her mother's. There was an emergency, the woman said. Melissa needed to come with her right away. Melissa, trusting and frightened, got into the car. She woke up in a basement, bound and gagged. The woman, Dorothy, stood over her with a camera. I'm going to take your picture, Dorothy said calmly. And if you ever try to leave or tell anyone what happens here, I'll send this to every newspaper in the country. Everyone will know what you are, what you've become. For 6 months, Melissa lived in that basement. Dorothy brought her food, clothes, even books. But she also brought men. Men who paid Dorothy considerable sums of money for time alone with the teenage girl locked in her cellar. The Polaroid wasn't evidence of a murder, it was insurance. Dorothy's way of ensuring Melissa's silence through shame and fear. Then, in the spring of 1987, something unexpected happened. Dorothy's husband, Frank, who supposedly knew nothing about the girl in the basement, had a massive heart attack. As paramedics rushed through the house, as neighbors gathered and chaos reigned, Dorothy made a calculation. She unlocked the basement door and told Melissa to run. If you ever speak of this, I'll find you, Dorothy whispered. I'll find your family, do you understand? Melissa ran. She hitchhiked across state lines, lied about her age, got work under a fake name, and spent the next 37 years building a life on top of the foundation of that trauma, never speaking about those 6 months, never acknowledging the nightmares, never ever feeling safe, until Detective Warren's phone call. She's dead? Melissa asked. Dorothy's really dead? Yes, ma'am. She passed away 3 weeks ago. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, Melissa took a full breath. The Melissa Rodriguez case opened a door that law enforcement hadn't even known existed. If Dorothy Holloway had done this once, had gotten away with it so completely, what else might be hidden in the basements and attics of America's seemingly normal homes? Detective Warren assembled a task force. They obtained search warrants for Dorothy's property, now inherited by Patricia, who stood in her childhood home watching police tear apart the walls she'd grown up within, her entire understanding of her life crumbling with each new discovery. In the basement, behind a false wall, they found a box. Inside were 63 Polaroids, 63 girls, 63 sets of terrified eyes staring out from photographs dated between 1979 and 2003. Patricia collapsed when they showed her. I lived here, she sobbed. I lived here my whole childhood, and how did I not know? It's a question that haunts every cold case that breaks open in someone's proximity. How did we not see? How were the signs invisible? How could evil live so close to us, sleep under the same roof, smile at us over breakfast, and we noticed nothing? The task force began the painstaking process of identifying the girls. They used the same aging software that had found Melissa. They cross-referenced missing persons databases going back 40 years. They reached out to retired detectives who'd worked cases that had gone cold decades ago. And slowly, miraculously, they started finding survivors. Jennifer Wallace, the second girl they located, was living in Seattle under her married name. When Detective Warren called her, she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone whose deepest secret had just been exposed, whose carefully constructed life was about to explode. I told myself I'd imagined it, Jennifer said, that it couldn't have been real, that it was some kind of psychotic break. I've been in therapy for 30 years, and I never told anyone the truth about what happened to me. She'd been held for 4 months in 1982. Same basement, same threats, same photographs used as weapons of shame. When she let me go, Jennifer continued, her voice hollow, she told me that if I ever spoke up, everyone would blame me. They'd say I was a runaway, a troubled girl, probably involved in drugs or prostitution. They'd say I wanted it. And you know what? She was right. That's exactly what they would have said in 1982. So I stayed silent. The third survivor they found, Angela Reeves, had a different story. When police called her in Phoenix, she didn't sound surprised. She sounded relieved. I've been writing letters to Cleveland PD for 20 years, Angela said, her voice sharp with old anger. I reported what happened to me in 1998, right after I escaped. I gave them Dorothy's name, her address, a description of the basement. Do you know what they told me? Warren closed his eyes, already knowing the answer. They said there was no evidence. They said a respected church secretary wouldn't do something like that. They said maybe I was confused, maybe I'd been involved with drugs and was misremembering. They didn't even send anyone to check the house. This is the other truth about cold cases that people don't want to acknowledge. Sometimes they're cold, not because the evidence didn't exist, but because no one believed the victims when they spoke up. The task force found 19 survivors in total. 19 women, now in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, who had spent decades thinking they were alone, thinking they were crazy, thinking no one would believe them. As word spread, other victims began coming forward. Women who'd escaped before Dorothy could photograph them. women who'd been held for only days or weeks, women who'd reported it at the time and been dismissed. By June 2023, the count was at 27 verified victims. And then the task force made another discovery. Hidden in Dorothy's attic in a box labeled Christmas decorations, they found ledgers. Detailed financial records going back to 1979. Names, dates, amounts paid. Dorothy hadn't just been a predator. She'd been running a business, and the client list read like a who's who of Cleveland society. Businessmen, lawyers, a city councilman, 2 police officers, a federal judge. Now the case wasn't just about one woman's crimes. It was about an entire network of powerful men who'd paid to abuse vulnerable girls and then used their influence to ensure those girls were never believed when they tried to speak up. Detective Warren sat in his office late one night, staring at the names in those ledgers, and thought about every cold case he'd worked in his career. How many had gone cold, not because of insufficient evidence, but because of insufficient will to pursue the truth? Let me pause here and ask you something. Put yourself in Patricia Holloway's position for a moment. Your mother, the woman who raised you, who taught you right from wrong, turns out to be a monster who destroyed dozens of lives. Do you bear responsibility for her crimes? Do you owe something to her victims? Leave a comment below and tell me. If you discovered a family member had committed terrible crimes, what would you do? Would you protect their memory? Or would you help expose the truth? Because what Patricia did next surprised everyone, including the survivors themselves. I'll tell you her answer, but first, let me take you inside one of the most crucial developments in solving cold cases: genealogical DNA testing. While the Cleveland Task Force was identifying Dorothy's victims through photographs across the country in Sacramento, California, a different kind of cold case was finally breaking open through technology that didn't even exist when the crime was committed. The Golden State Killer case in 2018 had proven that genealogical databases could solve the unsolvable. Now, in 2023, dozens of departments were using the same technique to crack cases that had haunted communities for generations. Detective Lisa Yamamoto had been obsessed with the Riverside Strangler case since she was a rookie in 2005. Between 1996 and 2001, 4 young women had been murdered in Riverside, California. The killer left no witnesses, minimal evidence, and a DNA profile that matched no one in any criminal database. For 22 years, that DNA sat in evidence useless, a genetic fingerprint of a killer walking free. Then Yamamoto got approval to upload the profile to GED Match, a genealogical database where people search for their ancestry and long-lost relatives. The DNA didn't match anyone exactly, but it found 3rd and 4th cousins, people who shared enough genetic markers to create a family tree. Yamamoto worked with a genetic genealogist named Dr. Rebecca Chen. Together, they built family trees backward from those distant cousins, looking for the point where the branches connected, where a potential suspect would fit. It took 3 months of painstaking research, building trees that stretched back to the 1800s, tracking marriages, births, deaths, and migrations. They narrowed it down to 3 possible suspects. 1 was deceased, 1 was in prison in another state during the murders, and the 3rd was a 56-year-old man named Richard Ellison, living in Portland, Oregon. On paper, Richard was unremarkable. He worked as a middle manager at an insurance company. He was married with 2 adult children. He volunteered at his church. He had no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. But he'd lived in Riverside between 1995 and 2002. Yamamoto needed a DNA sample to confirm the match. She couldn't get a warrant based on a genealogical database hit alone. It wasn't sufficient probable cause. So she did what investigators do in these situations. She waited for Richard to throw something away in a public place. It took 2 weeks of surveillance before Richard stopped at a coffee shop, drank from a paper cup, and tossed it in a public trash can. The DNA was a match. On August 3, 2023, Yamamoto arrested Richard Ellison for 4 counts of first-degree murder. His wife screamed that there'd been a mistake. His children insisted their father couldn't hurt anyone. His neighbors told reporters he was the kindest man they'd ever met. But the DNA didn't lie, and neither did the evidence that came tumbling out once investigators knew where to look. In Richard's garage, hidden in a locked cabinet, they found souvenirs. A necklace belonging to victim number 2, an earring from victim number 4, a diary that detailed not just the 4 known murders, but 3 others that had never been connected to the same killer. 7 women dead, and a man who'd hidden in plain sight for more than 2 decades, protected by the simple fact that he looked normal, acted normal, seemed incapable of such horror. His wife filed for divorce within a week. His children refused to speak to him, and the families of his victims finally had someone to hold accountable. But here's where the Richard Ellison case took a turn that no one expected. In October 2023, 2 months after his arrest, Richard's attorney announced that his client wanted to make a statement. Not a confession, not a plea deal, but a statement. The judge allowed it. The victims' families packed the courtroom, many of them meeting each other for the first time, bonded by their shared tragedy. Richard stood, his hands shaking, his face gray. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that the man who killed your daughters, your sisters, your friends, he's not who I am now." The courtroom erupted in anger. The judge called for order. Richard continued, "In 2003, I had a massive stroke. When I woke up in the hospital, I didn't remember the previous 7 years of my life. Not clearly. It was like looking at someone else's memories through fog, and what I saw there, what I'd done." He stopped, his voice breaking. "I've spent 20 years trying to be better than the monster I was. I became religious. I volunteered. I tried to help people. Not to make up for what I'd done, because nothing could do that, but because I couldn't be that person anymore." The family shouted at him. One father lunged forward before bailiffs restrained him, but Richard kept talking. "When the detective arrested me, part of me was relieved. I've been waiting for this day, knowing it would come eventually, knowing I deserved it. I'm pleading guilty to all charges. I won't appeal. I'll spend whatever remains of my life in prison. But I need you to know where the other 3 bodies are buried. I need to give those families closure too." The question of whether Richard Ellison's stroke genuinely changed him, or whether he was simply a skilled manipulator playing his final game, divided everyone who followed the case. Neurologists testified that severe strokes can alter personality and behavior. Psychologists argued that psychopathy doesn't just disappear because of brain trauma. But in the end, it didn't matter. Richard provided detailed information about 3 more victims, leading police to remains that had been missing for over 20 years. He pleaded guilty to all 7 murders. And in January 2024, He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. At the sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. 12 people spoke: mothers, fathers, siblings, friends. Their pain filled the courtroom like a physical presence. The last to speak was Maria Santos, whose sister Carmen had been the Riverside Stranglers' first victim in 1996. Maria was 61 years old. She'd spent 27 years waiting for this moment. "I used to fantasize about what I'd say to my sister's killer," Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I imagined screaming at him, listing everything Carmen would never get to do. She never got married, never had children, never got to see her parents grow old, never got to achieve any of the dreams she had." Richard sat motionless, his eyes on the floor. "But standing here now," Maria continued, "I realized that giving him my rage would be giving him something more of Carmen, something more of me. So instead, I'm going to tell you what you took from the world." And then Maria did something extraordinary. For 10 minutes, she talked about Carmen. Not about her death, but about her life. Her terrible singing voice that she insisted on sharing in the shower, her obsession with terrible horror movies. The way she collected porcelain cats, even though she was allergic to real ones. The scholarship she'd earned to study marine biology, her dream of swimming with whale sharks. "That's who Carmen Santos was," Maria finished. "A whole, complete, beautiful person who loved and was loved. And you can sit in your cell for the rest of your life, but you'll never take that away from her. She'll always be more than what you made her in those final moments." The courtroom was silent as Maria sat down. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. The case was solved, the killer imprisoned, but more importantly, the victims were being remembered as people, not just as names on a list of cold cases finally closed. This is what I've learned in documenting these cases. Solving them isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a different kind of journey for the families left behind. Back in Cleveland, Patricia Holloway was on her own journey. After the discovery of her mother's crimes, she could have disappeared, changed her name, moved across the country. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she did something radical. She reached out to her mother's victims. "I don't expect you to forgive her or to forgive me for being her daughter," Patricia wrote in a letter she sent to all 27 confirmed survivors. "But if there's anything I can do, any way I can help, please tell me. My mother's house, everything she owned, it all came to me, and I want to use it to try to make something right out of this horror." The responses varied. Some women didn't reply at all. Some sent angry letters telling Patricia they wanted nothing from Dorothy's family, but 8 of them agreed to meet with her. They gathered in a community center in Cleveland on a Saturday in September 2023. Patricia stood before these women, these survivors of her mother's evil, and listened as they told their stories. She didn't defend Dorothy. She didn't make excuses. She just listened. "I can't give you back the time she stole," Patricia said when they'd all spoken. "I can't undo the trauma. But I'm selling my mother's house and everything in it. The money will be divided equally among all 27 of you. And if any of you need therapy, medical care, anything that might help you heal, I'll use my own money to help provide it." One of the women, Melissa Rodriguez, the first victim to be identified, stood up. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." You didn't know what she was doing. Patricia's voice broke. Because I slept safely in my bed every night while you suffered in our basement. Because I ate dinner at our table while you went hungry. Because I had a childhood and she stole yours. I may not have known, but I benefited from her crimes. And I can't live with that unless I try to do something. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could redeem what Dorothy had done. But it was something else. A daughter choosing to break the cycle, to use inherited evil as an opportunity to create something better. The 8 women formed a support group, so they called it Dorothy's Daughters, reclaiming their connection to their trauma as a source of strength. Patricia joined them, not as a victim but as an ally. And together, they started advocating for better support for survivors of human trafficking and sexual abuse. By the end of 2023, they'd helped pass new legislation in Ohio requiring mandatory investigation of all human trafficking reports, regardless of the perceived credibility of the victim. Not all cold cases break open through DNA or photographs. Sometimes they're solved through nothing more than someone finally deciding to tell the truth. In November 2023, a man named Thomas Webb walked into the police station in Boulder, Colorado, and confessed to a murder that had happened 34 years earlier. Thomas was 72 years old. He'd been living in Arizona for the past 3 decades, working as a mechanic, living alone in a small apartment. He had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months at most. "I need to tell you about Christine Parker," Thomas said to the desk sergeant. "I killed her in 1989. Christine Parker had been a 23-year-old graduate student at the University of Colorado. On October 14, 1989, she left the library around 9 p.m. to walk back to her apartment. She never arrived. Her body was found 3 days later in a ravine outside of town. She'd been strangled. The investigation had focused on her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, and several other men in her life. Thomas Webb had never been a suspect. He'd been a stranger, a drifter passing through town, someone with no connection to Christine at all. "Why did you kill her?" Detective Robert Chen asked after confirming that details of Thomas's confession matched non-public information about the crime. Thomas looked down at his hands. "I was drunk, high on meth. I'd been living in my car for weeks. I saw her walking alone, and something in me just broke. I grabbed her, pulled her into my car. She fought. God, she fought so hard, and I panicked, and He couldn't finish." "Why are you confessing now?" Chen asked. "Because I'm dying," Thomas said simply. "And I've been carrying this for 34 years. It's eating me alive. I became sober in 1995. I've been clean for 28 years. I've tried to be a good person, to help people, to make up for what I did. But you can't make up for taking a life. And I can't die without Christine's family knowing what happened to her." Chen arrested Thomas on the spot. Within hours, the news spread. Christine Parker's mother, Janet, who was now 76 years old and living in a nursing home, received a call from the detective. "We found the man who killed your daughter," Chen told her gently. "He confessed. He's going to prison." Janet was silent for a long moment. "Is it someone we knew?" "No, ma'am, a stranger, someone passing through town." "All these years?" Janet whispered. "I thought it had to be someone Christine knew, someone she trusted. I suspected her friends, her boyfriend, people who cared about her. I damaged relationships, pushed people away because I was certain one of them was hiding something. This is another hidden cost of unsolved crimes. The suspicion that poisons every relationship, the way doubt becomes a corrosive force in the lives of those left behind. Thomas Webb pleaded guilty. Given his terminal diagnosis, the question of sentencing became complicated. He'd likely die before serving any significant time. But the judge sentenced him to life in prison anyway, stating that justice demanded acknowledgement of his crime, even if natural consequences would soon follow. Christine's family attended the sentencing. Her younger brother David, who'd been 19 when Christine was murdered and was now 53, stood to give a victim impact statement. "I've spent 34 years angry," David said. "Angry at the person who killed my sister, angry at the police for not solving it, angry at the world for being a place where something like this could happen. And that anger has defined my entire adult life. It ruined my first marriage. It damaged my relationship with my children. It made me hard and bitter and unable to trust." Thomas sat in his wheelchair, his body ravaged by cancer, listening. "And now here you are," David continued, "already dying, already punished by biology in a way that makes any sentence meaningless. And I realize that my anger has hurt me far more than any prison sentence will ever hurt you, so I'm not going to give it any more of my life." He turned to look at his mother in the gallery, at his own adult children sitting beside her. Christine was brilliant and kind and funny. She wanted to be an environmental lawyer. She cared about climate change before most people even talked about it. She made the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever tasted. She sang off-key in the car and didn't care who heard. That's who she was. A person, not a victim. And I'm going to spend whatever time I have left remembering her that way. Not as the girl who was murdered, but as my sister who lived. Thomas Webb died 4 months later in the prison medical facility. He'd lived 34 years longer than Christine Parker. Whether his deathbed confession was genuine remorse or a final selfish act to ease his own conscience, no one can say for certain. But for Christine's family, the not knowing was finally over. The question mark that had hung over their lives for more than 3 decades was replaced with a period. The sentence was complete. And while that didn't erase the pain, it allowed them to finally begin to heal. By early 2024, I'd spent a year documenting these cases, interviewing detectives, survivors, and families. I'd seen the worst of humanity and the best. I'd watched people destroy their own lives in service to evil, and I'd watched others dedicate their lives to seeking justice for strangers. But I still hadn't told you about Emma, about my sister, about what Detective Sarah Martinez found after 17 years of searching. I need to tell you now because Emma's case breaks every rule about how these stories are supposed to end. When Sarah called me that morning in January 2023, she didn't tell me they'd found Emma's body. She said they'd found Emma, present tense, alive. I didn't believe her at first. I thought I'd misheard, or that Sarah was being cruel, or that I was having some kind of psychotic break. "Rebecca, listen to me," Sarah said firmly. "Emma is alive. She's in Seattle. She's been living there for 15 years under the name Emily Thorne, and she wants to see you." The room spun. That's impossible. She wouldn't have just disappeared. She wouldn't have let us think she was dead for 17 years. "I know," Sarah said gently, "but she's going to explain everything. Can you come to Seattle?" I was on a plane 4 hours later. Emma, or Emily, or whoever she was now, met me at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market. I recognized her immediately, even though she'd changed her hair, her style, everything about her presentation. You can't hide from someone who shared a childhood with you, who knows every expression your face can make. We stared at each other across the table. I had 1,000 questions, 1,000 accusations, 1,000 years of pain to pour out. But all I could say was, why? Emma's eyes filled with tears. Because I couldn't take you with me, and if I'd told you I was leaving, you would have tried to stop me. Take me away from what? We had a good life. Mom and Dad loved us. What were you running from? Emma's hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Rebecca, do you remember Uncle Jim? Uncle Jim? Dad's brother? The fun uncle who always had candy and told the best stories, who died in a car accident when I was 18. What about him? I asked, but something cold was already spreading through my chest. He started abusing me when I was 11, Emma said quietly. It went on until I was 16. And when I finally told Mom and Dad, they didn't believe me. They said I was trying to get attention, that I was making things up, that Uncle Jim would never do something like that. I couldn't breathe. They chose him over me, Emma said. Their daughter told them she was being raped, and they chose to protect his reputation instead. So when I turned 19, I planned my escape. I saved money, I created a new identity, and I disappeared. But you could have told me, I said, tears streaming down my face. I would have believed you. I would have helped you. You were 16, Becca. You were still living in that house. If I told you, you would have confronted them. And they would have made your life hell. Or worse, you might have stayed silent to protect yourself, and that guilt would have eaten you alive. I couldn't do that to you. So instead you let me think you were dead, I shouted. Other customers turned to look. I didn't care. Do you have any idea what the last 17 years have been like? Mom developed anxiety so severe she became agoraphobic. Dad drank himself to death, and I spent every single day wondering what I could have done differently, what I could have said to make you stay. I know, Emma sobbed. I followed you all online. I know about Mom. I know about Dad. I read everything you've written about cold cases, and every single day I wanted to reach out. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me, afraid you'd try to make me come back, afraid that telling you would put you in danger. Danger from what? Uncle Jim is dead. But the others aren't. The coffee shop suddenly felt very cold. What others? Emma pulled out her phone and showed me photographs. Men I recognized, family friends, people from our church, our high school guidance counselor. Uncle Jim wasn't acting alone, Emma said. He was part of a network, men who shared victims, who protected each other, who had enough power and influence in Portland to make sure no one ever believed the girls who tried to speak up. I was just one of many. How do you know this? Because after I escaped, I spent years investigating. I found other victims. I documented everything, and 6 months ago, I finally had enough evidence to take to the FBI. My sister, who I'd thought was dead, who I'd mourned for 17 years, had been conducting her own investigation into a child abuse network. She'd become the detective I'd trained to be, all while I was searching for her. There's going to be arrests soon, Emma said. Major arrests. And when that happens, my name is going to come out. People will know I'm alive. I wanted to tell you first, before you heard it on the news. I didn't know whether to hug her or scream at her. So I did both. We sat in that coffee shop for 6 hours and she told me everything, the abuse, the escape, the new life she'd built in Seattle, the relationship she was in, the therapy she'd been in for years, the other victims she'd found and helped. "I became a social worker," she said. "I specialize in helping trafficking victims and abuse survivors. I've spent the last decade trying to prevent other girls from going through what I went through." "You could have done that without disappearing," I said, still angry, still hurt. "Maybe," she admitted. "But at 19, traumatized and terrified, disappearing felt like the only option. And once I'd been gone for a year, 2 years, 5 years, coming back seemed impossible." "How do you explain that gap? How do you face the people you've hurt?" "Like this," I said. "Exactly like this. By telling the truth." The arrests happened in March 2024. 12 men in Portland, Oregon were charged with crimes ranging from child sexual abuse to human trafficking to production of child sexual abuse material. The network had operated for over 30 years, hiding behind their respectable positions in the community. Emma's testimony was crucial to the prosecution. She had to face our hometown, had to endure people who accused her of lying, of seeking attention, of making false accusations to destroy innocent men's lives. But she also found allies. 17 other women came forward with their own stories of abuse by the same men. Women who had been children when it happened. Women who, like Emma, hadn't been believed when they tried to speak up. I flew to Portland for the trial. So did Emma. We stood together in the courthouse, two sisters reunited after 17 years, facing down the men who destroyed our family. Our mother came too. She was 73 now, frail and anxious, but she came. She approached Emma in the hallway outside the courtroom, her hands shaking. "I'm sorry," Mom whispered. "I'm so sorry. You told me the truth, and I didn't believe you. And I've lost 17 years with my daughter because I was a coward." Emma's face hardened. "You were more than a coward. You were complicit. You chose to protect a rapist over your own child." "I know," Mom said, "and I'll never forgive myself. But if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the mother I should have been." It wasn't a happy reunion, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was honest, and sometimes honesty is all we can ask for. The trial lasted 6 weeks. All 12 men were convicted. The sentences ranged from 20 years to life. After it was over, Emma and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, exhausted and emotionally drained. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "Go back to Seattle, back to my work, back to my life?" She paused. "But maybe you could visit, maybe we could start over?" "Not start over," I said. "We can't erase 17 years, but we can move forward." And we did. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, long silences, painful conversations about everything we'd missed. But slowly, carefully, we rebuilt something between us. Not the relationship we'd had as teenagers, but something new, forged in truth instead of assumption. Emma's case taught me something crucial about cold cases. Sometimes they're not cold because the evidence is gone, but because the truth is too painful for people to acknowledge. Sometimes solving them requires not just forensic science and investigative skill, but the courage to confront uncomfortable realities about people we love. By the end of 2024, I documented 14 cold cases that had been solved in the previous 2 years. Each one was different. Each one involved different technology, different investigative techniques, different circumstances. But they all had one thing in common. Someone refused to give up. A detective who kept working the case long after everyone else had moved on. A family member who never stopped searching. a victim who found the courage to speak up decades later. A stranger who saw a photograph and decided to get involved. Justice, I learned, isn't a lightning bolt that strikes from heaven. It's the result of persistent, unglamorous, often frustrating work by people who believe that truth matters. The Melissa Rodriguez case led to legislation in 12 states improving how human trafficking is investigated and prosecuted. Patricia Holloway's foundation has helped over 300 survivors access therapy and support services. The Riverside Strangler's conviction brought closure to 7 families and proved that genetic genealogy could solve even the most carefully hidden crimes. Other departments began using the same technique, and in 2024 alone, 43 cold cases were solved through genealogical DNA. Thomas Webb's confession, as controversial as it was, freed Christine Parker's family from decades of misplaced suspicion and allowed them to finally grieve properly. And Emma's courage in coming forward helped dismantle a child abuse network and showed other survivors that it's never too late to speak your truth. I started this documentary talking about closure, about how I didn't believe in it anymore. I'm not sure I was wrong. Closure implies an ending, a neat resolution, a final chapter. But these cases don't end, they transform. Pain becomes purpose. Loss becomes advocacy. Silence becomes testimony. The families don't get their loved ones back. The survivors don't get their stolen years returned. But they get something else: validation, justice, and the knowledge that their truth finally matters. On December 31st, 2024, I visited Emma in Seattle. We made dinner together, something we hadn't done since we were teenagers. As we cooked, she told me about a new case she was helping with. Another survivor coming forward after decades of silence. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked. "Disappearing? All those years we lost?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that it felt necessary. I regret that I was failed so completely by the people who should have protected me, but I don't regret surviving. I don't regret building a life, and I don't regret the work I've done to help others." That night, as the year turned, I thought about all the cases I'd documented, all the families I'd met, all the survivors who'd shared their stories, and I realized that this is what solving cold cases really means. Not erasing the past, but giving people the tools to build a future that isn't defined by their trauma. If you've watched this entire documentary, you're part of that solution. You've witnessed these stories. You've honored these victims by learning their names and hearing their truth. Now I'm asking you to do something with that knowledge. Share these stories, talk about them. Donate to organizations that support survivors and fund cold case investigations. Advocate for better laws and better support systems. And if you're carrying a secret, if you've witnessed something or know something about an unsolved case, speak up. It's never too late. These cases prove that truth can surface after decades, that justice can arrive even when hope seems gone. Subscribe to this channel, because every month we're documenting new cases, new solutions, new reasons to believe that the arc of justice, however long, does eventually bend toward truth. My sister was missing for 17 years. Now she's found. Not unchanged, not unmarred, but alive and fighting and making the world better than it was. That's not closure. That's something better. That's transformation. That's redemption. That's revenge against the darkness that tried to destroy her. And that's why we keep investigating, keep documenting, keep refusing to let these cases die in dusty file boxes, because somewhere, someone is waiting for the call that changes everything. Someone is carrying a secret that could solve a mystery. Someone is hoping that truth still matters. And as long as there are cold cases, there will be people like Detective Martinez, like Patricia Holloway, like my sister Emma, refusing to give up until every single one of them is brought into the light. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of the solution. Justice may be slow, but it never stops coming.